Good evening, ladies and gentlemen and friends. Welcome to another exciting Pretty Gritty Tours event. This evening, it is my humble privilege to introduce the fine storytellers over at Food Fright. Food Fright is a collection of four very talented individuals who will be telling ghost stories tonight at the Antique Sandwich Company in Tacoma, Washington. This is a benefit event. You will have the opportunity to donate tonight using the QR code right there in the corner or the link down in the description. And 100% of your donations and proceeds from this event go towards ending hunger in Pierce County. Nourish Food Group here in Pierce County and their food banks will receive this donation, and this is our opportunity to do something about ending hunger in the region. So without further ado, just remember, at any point, you can use the QR code in the corner or the link in the description, and we'll keep this up forever and always. Here are your storytellers tonight.
Bolt and bar the door. Draw your curtains tight. Wise folk are in before moonrise tonight. Halloween, Halloween, chestnuts to roast. A gift for the fairy, a prayer for the ghost.
Whose fortune will be told this night is known, whose hand is full of gold, who goes alone? Halloween, Halloween, snapdragon blue, a lover for me, and a fortune for you.
Stars shiver blue and green, moons wide and white, there tattered clouds between, witches take flight. Halloween, Halloween, elves at the keyhole, and imps on the hob.
12 calls the deep bell to the hollow night. 12 whisper steeper tops far out of sight. Halloween, Halloween, fires burn high. Who shall say certainly? Who can tell truthfully what solemn company passed through the sky?
We want to thank you folks for coming tonight. It's wonderful for all of us to be back here at the Antique Sandwich Company. It's good to see some old friends and some new friends here tonight. We've got, and it's good to have our four storytellers together. We've all got quite a history together. Karen and I have been telling Hink Tales together every Halloween for 31 years now. And all of us that you'll see tonight have been around with this group for a very long time. Around the bonfire at Fort Nisqually, here at the Antique quite a few times, even floating into people's homes on Zoom during COVID. I understand we have some folks joining us remotely tonight, so that's great. We're happy to welcome everyone. And we also have tonight Jim Weatherford is with us, the man who created the bonfires for us for years. Even in deep rain, he managed somehow to summon fire, so he deserved that title, the heir of Prometheus. And this year, we only missed Halloween by one day. This is All Saints Day, which is quite appropriate. Back around the 9th century, the Christian church finally acknowledged that it had created more days or more saints than it had days. And so they designated November 1st to be the catch-all for all the saints and apostles. And a while after that, a lot of us ordinary folks started to say, well, what about us? And the church created All Souls Day on November 2nd to be a day for remembering and hopefully praying for all the folks who never quite got canonized. And it was all supposed to put a happy face on the ancient Celtic and pagan superstitions that the church had worked so hard to eradicate. Instead, a lot of those just kind of circled around, and they all of a sudden popped up on October 31st again. And the Scots called All Saints Day All Hallows Day, And so October 31st was All Hallows Eve. And that got shortened over time to Halloween. And it has stayed around all this time to be pretty much the collection point for all of our fears and superstitions. And it's a time to confront and in some cases, I think, to embrace and celebrate our fears. There just seems to be something in us that makes us, pushes us forward to put a hand on a doorknob that we know should never be turned and opened. And I used to decry the graphic nature of a lot of the horror movies that we've seen in recent years. But then my wife, a couple of days ago, saw a BBC article on the internet that talked about the beneficial and even therapeutic effect that horror movies have on a number of people. And the article talked about an online electronic program that was created for children to deal with their fear of ghosts. She couldn't remember if it was in the Netherlands or in Sweden. It was somewhere in Europe. I rather hope that it's Sweden. I would like to think that there is a program that has been created so that children can deal with a fear of the unreal that helps prepare them to deal with the very real horrors that they'll face as adults in Sweden, such as taxes and lutefisk. But for tonight, hope you folks will make yourselves comfortable, relax, and we'll see what our therapists have in store for us tonight. Oh, and I get to go first. Mike Preston and I, you'll see Mike in a little bit, we live within about a block of one another in Ocean Shores. It's a small community on the Washington coast in Grays Harbor County. Just the other side of the entrance to Grays Harbor, to the south of us, is a small town called Westport. And it's a fishing town. It has a large marina, a lot of commercial fishing boats, crab boats, charter boats, large pleasure boats. And like most fishing towns, it has a fisherman's memorial. So there are a lot of things that happened to fishermen over the years. And the most recent for Westport, just this last May, the fishing boat, 68-footer, the Captain Raleigh, sprained a leak and sank outside the harbor. The crew was rescued, but the captain was lost. They never found his body. And I expect that there will be another plaque on an already very crowded memorial. Going to sea has always been a dangerous undertaking, much more so in the old days of the sailing ships. At one time, it was estimated that 1 out of every 3 folks who followed the sea would close out their illustrious career by being food for the fishes. There are plenty of dangers without going looking for more, like that fella Curly. Now, Curly was a sailor who was fascinated with heights. Even as a young boy in the Orkney Islands, before he ever went to sea, he would hang suspended by a rope over the tall cliffs of the island of Hoy to gather eggs from the seabirds who nested in the cliffs. There he'd be, the edge of the cliff high above him, the raging sea far below. And there he was, swaying like a pendulum in the wind, nothing between him and eternity but a slender rope. And it was the thing he loved. And when he was grown and gone to sea, there was no mast too tall for him to climb to the very top, no matter the pitch and roll of the sea. Ashore, there was no tower too unsteady, no cliff too tall to peer over the edge. And he used to talk of what a wonderful feeling it must be to fall from a great height. Well, it happened that Curly's ship dropped anchor in a South American port. And this is in the time after the revolutions had come and gone, when many of the old Spanish and Portuguese lighthouses had been abandoned and fallen into ruin. there was a very tall abandoned lighthouse in the port where Curly's ship lay. And he got the idea that he wanted to climb to the top of it. Now his shipmate said, "You're crazy. Look at this thing. The bricks are falling out. They're all over the ground. The mortar's crumbling away. You'll get killed." But once they realized he was serious, being sailors, they started making bets on whether he would get to the top and survive. And one of the sailors screwed up his courage and agreed to go with him as a witness. So the two started up the crumbling old stairs through the darkness up into the tower of the old lighthouse. It was hard going, but they made it out to the top and climbed out onto the iron railing far above. And they shouted down to the sailors below, but with the height and with the wind, their voices didn't carry, and the sailors were intent on their card game, not looking up. So Curly's shipmate got an idea. He took out his bandana, put in his pocket knife. Curly added his lucky coin for added weight. They knotted it up very carefully, tied it tight, and threw it out to try and attract the attention of the sailors below. But the wind caught it, and they lost sight of it on the way down. So there was nothing to do now but start back down. And the other sailor had just gotten to the doorway to start down the spiraling stone stairs when Curly got a strange grin and said, "I know a quicker way." And then without a word, he leaped out over the railing straight down toward the sailors below. Now the other sailor shouted a warning and went racing down the spiral stairs, expecting to find his shipmates crushed under the weight of Curly's fallen body. But when he emerged into the daylight, they were there playing cards, as if nothing had happened, as if nothing had come crashing down out of the sky onto them. For nothing had. Curly had never landed. They searched the grounds for yards around. They searched the cliff. They searched the beach. They never found any sign of Curly. They did find the bandana. Curious thing about that bandana. It was as tightly knotted as it had been, but when they untied it all and unfolded it, there was the sailor's pocket knife, but Curly's lucky coin was gone. Now maybe that, like Curly, had vanished on the way down. That's what the sailors all thought whenever they would talk about it from then on, in smoky bars or the darkness of a rolling forecastle. They always called Curly the man who fell forever. Okay, well, one bit of housekeeping here. We can always tell who has been here before and who is new. We appreciate the applause. Very polite, like we're in the Opera House back in London. But for Halloween, just do it a little differently. If we think someone's told a pretty good story, we'll give them a good ghostly moan. That's what's happening in a lot of places here. So let's just try this all one time, and then we'll launch into the next story. So 1, 2, 3. All right, a haunting we will go.
Well, it's never easy being a traveler, particularly if you have little money to your name. And so it was for Jacob Lake, traveling through the swamps of the South. Now, he'd been walking all day trying to get to the next town where he had some extended family and a new job waiting for him. But he'd been walking and walking, and he was not going to make it before dark. And after dark? Well, that was no time to be in the swamp. So he was very relieved to see this little house off over there, just behind a curtain of trees and moss. So he went up and he knocked on the door, and this old woman answered it. And he said to her, "Now, ma'am,
I don't have much money, but I'm tired and I'm hungry. And if you let me stay, well, every penny in my pocket is yours. Oh, she looked down at him so sweet and said, oh, now you keep your money. You just lend those big, strong arms to some chores for me in the morning. Come inside, come inside. And oh, he was so relieved. He hurried on inside and he was so happy to see all of the food that she laid out at dinner. It was quite the buffet. And, well, but after dinner, it just being a little one-room cabin, she gave him a blanket and told him that he could go out and sleep in the woodshed. And don't you come back until morning. That is, I'm old and need my beauty rest, she said, chuckling to herself. But Jacob wasn't picky. He took that blanket, he went out to the woodshed, he laid himself down, thinking how lucky he was, how kind that old woman. And then he started to hear a rustling and a scratching in the dark. And he went in search of that noise, and what he found was on the outside of that woodshed, where there was a cage, and inside it, a crow. And that crow looked right at him and said, she's not what she seems. And Jacob didn't know quite what to make of that, so the crow repeated itself. It said, she's not what she seems. Don't believe me. Go look for yourself. And it gestured with one great wing off towards the house. Well, talking crows, Jacob was getting a little curious, so he hurried off back to the house and he peeked in through a window. And what do you suppose he saw but the old woman sitting next to the fire there with her spinning wheels, just sitting in a pile of hot coals, not seeming to mind one bit, though she did look awfully hot. My goodness, she was sweating so much it started to look like she was melting. And then she grabbed hold of her chin and pulled and hooked that skin right onto her spinning wheel and began to spin. Started spinning the skin right off her body, one long strand like a hideous taffy pole. He thought it could get no worse, but as that skin fell away, underneath it was nothing. Nothing at all. Like it was even kind of hard to look at. His eyes would just sort of slide off to the side of it. But what he could see from his peripheral vision was something like a starless night. He could feel it too, this drawing void, like a window left open in a windstorm. And from that emptiness was just a sense of such incredible evil. That was all he could really think to call it. And then he heard her say, oh, that old skin is getting so worn out. It's going to be so lovely to get a new one from my guest in the morning. And at that, well, that lit a fire under Jacob, and no mistake. He started to hurry away, but before he could, he heard that door slam, and he saw that evil nothingness go out into the dark and disappear into the night. Well, he wanted to run, but she could be anywhere now, camouflaged by the night itself. And that was when he heard, I know her secret. If you'll help me escape, I'll help you. Well, it took a couple of cracks with good solid rock to get the lock on that bird's cage to crack open, but as soon as it did, the crow flapped out, looked at him and said, quick to the spinning wheel, fetch me her skin. Well, Jacob hurried trying to get that little spool of skin off of the spinning wheel, and as soon as he did, well, the crow told him the woman's secret, that darkness like her could only survive in darkness. She needed that skin to protect her from the light. The crow took the little bitty end of that skin and he flew off away to the top of the tallest tree. He flew under thorns and through tall grasses, back and forth all across the yard, until that spool spun away, empty, skin strewn all over every little bit of nature. Quick, now we wait, said the crow. And Jacob and the crow, they went and hid behind that little woodshed there and waited. And I don't know what that witch was doing, what kind of evil she was working out in the world, but it took her most of the night. By the time she got back there, it was almost sunrise, and when she saw that empty spool where her skin ought to be, oh, she was enraged and terrified. My skin, she cried, running back and forth. They could see that little patch of darkness zipping back and forth, trying to gather in strands of skin quick as she could, but not quick enough, because the sun came up and it burned the nothingness of her away to less than nothing at all. Well, Jacob thanked the crow, who flew off to other adventures, and he hurried off to that town where he had a new job waiting. He went there and never left home again. But that witch's skin, oh, something like that's awful hard to get rid of. So next time you go out in the early morning, and something kind of catches on your face, your clothes, it's so fine and strong, feels like it must be a spider's web. Maybe just clean yourself off extra good, just in case.
Good evening. Fee Andrews today, Richard Fee Andrews. I used to work for the Hudson's Bay Company back in the day at Fort Nisqually, just down the road a little ways, about halfway to Olympia. And while I was there, I met this Scotsman named McPhail, I believe his name, a long time. And we became quite thick friends. We had a common interest. We had a keen love for demon rum. And when we came back, and we'd had a little too much to drink, they'd lock us in the root cellar so we wouldn't disturb the other laborers. So we got to talking and we became quite good friends. Well, it was getting on towards the end of fall, and it was a bright, sunny Saturday, and Dr. Ptolemy, who was in charge of Fort Nisqually at the time, decided to give all the men half a day off to do anything we wanted. So McPhail and I went to the sales shop and took just a small draw on our wages and went to Steilacoom City to the bowling alley. Now, we don't bowl. We don't even know how to bowl, but they sell rum at the bowling alley. So there we went. And we sat and we watched bowling, and we watched billiards, and we drank rum. And then we drank some more rum. And then McPhail looked out the window and he says, "It's getting late. We should head back. It's a long walk." So we headed out, and the late afternoon sun was really warm. And it started to percolate that rum that was circulating around in our bloodstream. So we thought, we should sit in the shade for a bit and take a little rest. So we found this big maple tree, and we sat down and promptly fell asleep. Well, I woke up sometime later, and it was dark. And I poked McPhail, and I said, "We should get up and go back." And he mumbled something in Gaelic, and I can't repeat here, and said, "Leave me alone, I'm fine." So I'm fine. I left. Well, I knew it was 2 miles at least back to Fort Nisqually, but there's a shortcut that takes a mile off that trip, although it does go through the graveyard. Well, I'm not afraid of ghosties, so I took the shortcut. What I had forgotten was that on Friday, one of our laborers had passed, and Saturday morning, a couple of fellows dug a grave for him out here in the graveyard. So I'm walking through the graveyard, and next thing I know, I'm floating. And then I hit the bottom of the grave with a tremendous thump, knocked the wind out of me. Well, I pulled myself up, I looked around, I could reach up to the top of the grave and get a good grip on it. And I started to pull myself up and climb, and the dirt came up underneath my hands and I fell back in. Well, I tried this 3 more times, and I thought, well, this is a waste of time. I'll curl up in the corner here and go to sleep. Somebody will come along in the morning with a ladder, or they can fetch a ladder and get me out of there. So I'm curled up in the corner, just about to fall asleep, and I hear McPhail's gravelly voice singing some Gaelic drinking song headed my way. And I was going to shout out and say, "Watch out for the grave," and he fell in. Well, he hit with a pretty good thump too. And he looks around and he tries climbing out with a similar result to mine. Well, okay. I stood up and he tries it again and he falls back in. So I reached over and put my hand on his shoulder and I says, "McPhail, you can't get out like that." And he did.
Salt of the earth. A wonderful old phrase for folks who just make the world better by being here. You guys are salt for the earth. You're here, you're donating to folks who don't have enough to eat, so claim that for yourself. But today I want to tell you 2 other folks who are definitely salt of the earth, and that would have to be Jacob and his Martha. They lived on a farm just outside a wee town, and all the rest of the village, well, they thought the world and all of Jacob and Martha and Jacob thought the world and all of the town. It was just that kind of settlement. Everybody liked each other, everybody helped each other, the kind of place we all dream of, right? And I need to tell you about their children, because Jacob and Martha, their two kiddos, the eldest, Cassie, she was about fourth grade-ish, and she was always laughing and smiling, a good-natured young gal, but she also loved school, and she worked really hard at it. Her parents even gave her a little golden heart-shaped locket one year when she did exceptionally well that term, and she loved her little brother. Now, at the time of this story, Harvey was a toddler. You know how everybody says, oh, what a beautiful baby, and sometimes, well, this one really was. Little Harvey had that halo of blonde curls and the bright blue eyes and this ready smile that would just melt the heart of anyone who saw him. And he was such a good-natured little guy. He loved everybody. And when Cassie, who loved to help take care of her little brother, when Cassie taught him how to blow kisses, oh, that became his absolute favorite thing in the world to do. Somebody would come and he'd start blowing kisses. And he loved doing one other thing too, and that was playing with Cassie's little golden locket. Oh, when he was little and she was taking care of him, holding him in arms, he'd just spend hours looking up and playing with it. And when his teeth started coming in, well, then he'd start kind of chewing on it, and it kind of eased the pain in his gums there. He got some teeth marks on that locket, but Cassie didn't care. He was her beloved little brother. Now, I fear I need to bring some sadness into this story, because this is the days before childhood vaccines, when deadly childhood illnesses, they were definitely a thing. Deadly illnesses. Don't believe me? Look in just about any old graveyard and you'll see row upon row of small little graves. Well, this was no exception. It's been so long, nobody remembers exactly what he got, but little Harvey was up and alive one day and smiling, and by the next evening, his little spirit had flown. Well, of course, his family was devastated. The whole community gathered around to try and help him through this time. All the women helped Martha sew a little gown for him. This was the days that if you're toddlers, whether you're a boy or girl, you're wearing little gowns. And this was a beautiful little white gown with tucks and all sorts of other things. They even made a special pillow they could put at the bottom of that casket so he wouldn't have to sleep forever on that hard wood. And looking at her little son there, looking so angelic, Martha said, oh, if only she had gotten that photograph she wanted. Now, nowadays, of course, everybody has a cell phone. We're taking pictures of absolutely everything. Some things maybe we shouldn't. But, of course, this was back the days when cameras, they were big, they were cumbersome. Not everyone had them. Actually, it was mostly just the professional photographers who had the cameras. And in this case, the closest professional photographer, well, that was Mr. McIntyre in the next town across the way. And he really tried to come, but there'd been a rainstorm. The roads were all mud, and he couldn't make it through with his buggy. And Martha said, well, that was all right. She'd always have a picture of her Harvey in her heart. And right before they closed the coffin, why Cassie, she just couldn't stop herself. She reached back and she took the necklace out from around her neck and she put it around her little brother's neck, saying that it'd make her happy to know that he forever would have a piece of her heart. Well, this being a small, loving town, I don't have to tell you how beautiful the memorial and the burials were. But of course, then life had to go on, didn't it? Life always does. And Jacob, he had a farm to take care of. And he had to work on the fences there at the far side of his fields. And his fields were so big that when he was spending time several days in a row working on the far side, he would always sleep in an old dilapidated cabin on the far side, because it was too far to come back and forth, and this was no exception. So he got up early. This was several weeks after the memorial. Got up early, rode over there. He worked hard on the fence, and then he was exhausted, and he fell asleep on the cot in that cabin. And he woke up partway through the night. The cabin, it was filled with bright light. It reminded him of, he couldn't remember remember what it was. And he looked across, and there, in the corner, right across from where he was sleeping, there was his little Harvey. He was standing there, his blonde curls in the bright light, and he waved at his father and blew him a kiss, and then he blew out the candle he was holding, and everything was dark. Well, Jacob managed to get himself back to sleep, and he woke up the next day and said it was a dream. This was just a dream, and he worked hard on the fence, almost finished it up, and he fell asleep that night and woke up in the middle of the night because, again, the cabin was filled with that bright light. And suddenly it flashed in his mind, literally. This was the kind of bright light Mr. McIntyre, the photographer, used when he was taking a photograph in the inside. He'd have a rank of candles or lanterns with mirrors behind it to make everything bright. That's much it'd be. And there was little Harvey over there, and he was nodding his head and smiling, almost like he could read his father's mind. And he waved, and he blew him a kiss, and he blew out his candle and the lights, and little Harvey was gone. And Jacobs thought to himself, this couldn't be true. Harvey didn't come back so his mother could get a photograph? No, he was going mad. He knew this was, and he managed to fall asleep, but he woke up the next morning, and he was just sure he had to do something here. So he finished up work on that fence, and then he got on his horse, saddled it up, and he headed over to the next town, to Mr. McIntyre, the photographer. Of course, he couldn't tell him that he'd seen a ghost, so he made up a story and said how there were some particularly lovely wildflowers there next to the cabin where he was working, and could he borrow the camera so he could take a picture because he knew it would make Martha happy. Well, Mr. McIntyre said, of course, Jacob. He was willing to do something like that for him, and he taught Jacob how to use the camera, how to mix the chemicals, how to put the chemicals on the glass plate, put it in the back of the camera, and open the camera cap, the lens cap, for 20 seconds to get the full exposure and close it. And then Mr. McIntyre wrapped the camera up and he put it on his buggy where there was a special spot to strap it in. And he said, Jacob, you take this camera and the buggy and you make a photograph for your Martha. I'll see you in the morning. And I have some time tomorrow morning. I'll be sure to develop it. Well, Jacob took the camera and he got to the cabin and he did all of what Mr. McIntyre taught him how to do, got the camera all set up, got it facing over there towards the corner, and he sat and waited. And he knew that he was just going crazy, but suddenly the cabin was filled with that light again. And there was little Harvey, and he was nodding, he was pointing to the camera, and he was grinning at his dad. And so his dad went over, Jacob went, and he took the lens cap off, and then there was a miracle because this little toddler stood stock still, grinning for 20 whole seconds. And then his dad put the cover on the lens, and little Harvey nodded and he smiled and he blew 3 kisses, and then he blew out the candle and he disappeared. Well, the next morning, Jacob wrapped up that camera and he took it over to Mr. McIntyre, and he wondered what he would say when Mr. McIntyre developed a picture of just a dark cabin because he knew this had been a dream. But Mr. McIntyre came out from his dark room and he said, Jacob, if I wasn't seeing this with my eyes, I wouldn't believe it. And they both looked in astonishment. Here was this glass plate with a little boy with a head of blonde curls and those bright eyes and the little heart-shaped locket with the teeth marks around his neck and that smile that would warm anybody's heart. And he said, I'm going to wrap it up in the special blue paper that I only use for my best customers. And he gave it in the plate. And he said, now you take that home to your Martha and you come back and tell me how she smiled. And so Jacob did take that home to his Martha, and Martha and Cassie, they both smiled through their tears. Well, the years have gone by, of course, as they do. Jacob and Martha and the family, well, they're long gone. But they do say, if you find that little town with the farm just outside and you knock on the door and you ask real polite now, oh, that family will pull out their treasured heirloom. They'll unwrap that blue tissue paper and you'll get to see that little glass plate with a picture of the little boy with the smile that'll warm your heart.
the first storytellers in these parts, long before notions of ghosts and witches and the devil and their kin made their way overland or across the oceans, were the Indians, the Native Americans. Like all of us, they faced the challenge of making sense of a sometimes baffling world. And many of their stories concerned enormous beings with supernatural powers who roamed the dark edges of the forest. Because the forests of the northwest coast were and are vastly deep, and they held and still hold many mysteries. Now, in the stories, the beings take different forms or different sizes, different names, different powers. And they've continued to evolve. And in some of them now, you'll hear Sasquatch described as a benevolent, protective guardian of the forest. Some of the other creatures, not so much. Maybe the one that is most appropriate for tonight, the first time I ever heard the story, was called The Cannibal Giant. And I heard it many years ago around a campfire, throwing sparks into the night sky. And the setting for that story was the Fraser River in British Columbia. And the name of the creature was Zunaqua. Now, there are other stories with other names, but that's the way I heard it, and that's the one that's stayed with me all these years. Now, Zunaqua was an enormous being with huge muscular arms and legs, a huge hairy body, nasty sharp fangs for teeth. And the worst thing about her of all was that she was immortal. She was impervious against any arrow or any weapon that could be brought against her. And all the people of the villages knew to stay clear of her. But once the son of a chief ventured too far into the mountains in search of mountain goats, and he had stumbled upon the enormous lodge of Zunaqua. Now he tried to tiptoe away, but too late. She'd spotted him and she gave chase. Now fortunately, his father, the chief, knowing his son and anticipating just such an event, had given him a number of magical charms to use. And he threw these over his shoulder, each in their turn, as he ran. And the magical tools created first a great thicket of brush, then an enormous towering cliff, then a lake, and finally a huge bank of fog. And each of these slowed Zunaqua in her pursuit, but even so, she was close on his heels by the time he reached his father's longhouse and dove inside. Now, the longhouses were large. They held extended families. There were 70 souls inside, listening to Zunaqua bellow and stomp outside and devour all of their salmon from their drying racks outside. When a few brave or rash souls went out to try and stop her, she ate them as well. And then she cried, "You may as well all come out, for I'm an immortal being. I can wait here much longer than you can." Well, the chief shouted back, "If you keep us trapped in here, you'll have nothing in the end but our skinny, starved bodies. And if you kill and eat all of us, you will never find salmon drying in our racks again. I make you this offer. If you will go away and leave us for 4 days, we will prepare for you such a feast as you have never seen or imagined. And after the feast, since he is the one who brought you here, you can eat my son." Now Zunaqua drooled and slavered over that prospect and said, "All right, but remember, I am an immortal spirit, and if this is a trick, my vengeance will be terrible." Now when she was gone back into her mountain fastness, the son came to his father and said, "Hey, Dad, His father, the chief, said, "Don't worry, son. I've got a plan." And assembling everyone in the village, he said, "We have 4 days only and one slender hope. There is much to be done. Now a third of you must go out and hunt and gather everything you can find in the forest, all the deer and all the game you can find, all the roots, all the bulbs, everything to make an enormous feast and bring it back here. The other third of you must go into the forest and gather and cut all of the wood that you can haul back to this village. And the rest of you must dig an enormous pit right here." And for 4 days, they worked as they had never worked before. On the morning of the 4th day, the chief had the enormous pit covered over with long poles and then hidden with leaves. And in front of that, he had built an enormous bench large enough to seat a giant. And in front of that, the wood for an enormous fire to cook a feast such as the villagers had never seen before. And when Zunaqua arrived that evening, the smell of the food cooking was so wonderful. The fire was so warm that she took a seat on the bench without a question or a thought, and she began to devour the feast, swallowing deer and elk, whole bones and all, crying out, "More meat!" And they brought more. In her ravenous gluttony, she failed to notice that each time they stoked the fire, each time they brought more food, they moved the fire just a little closer to where she sat. But still she cried, "More meat!" And more was brought, the fruits of 4 days of desperate hunting. And at last, the fire was so close to her that it began to singe the hair on her body. And she moved the bench back away from the fire. And as she did so, her heel slipped over the edge of the enormous pit, and great arms flailing and great voice bellowing in surprise and rage, she toppled backward into the pit, crashing through the poles, the leaves, and landing with an enormous great thud in the bottom of the pit. "Now!" cried the chief, and the villagers ran to push in and shovel in all of the burning wood, the coals down upon her. "You fools!" she cried. "I am a mortal. I cannot be killed." "More wood!" cried the chief. And they ran with more wood, brush, leaves, dogfish oil, anything that would burn. It all rained down upon her. And great showers of sparks by the millions, great clouds of greasy black smoke belched up from that pit. And her voice became strange and high and cried out, "Though you slay me, I will live. Though you burn me, I will drink your blood." Now the fire burned far into the night and into the next day. When it was finally cold enough that they could poke at the ashes with long sticks, the villagers nervously searched for Zunaqua. Well, the ashes and stray sparks drifted away by the millions, but no bellowing Zunaqua emerged from the ashes. "We've done it! We've killed her! We're free!" they cried. In a sense, they were right, for Zunaqua never returned to devour their salmon, never returned to devour the villagers themselves. But in a sense, she was also right, for she did return the following spring, the following summer, and all the springs and all the summers that followed in the form of the ashes and the sparks from that fire. For as Zunaqua burned and was immortal. Those sparks and those ashes had a life of their own, and they returned to drink the blood of the villagers and the blood of all of us who have come to live in this paradise. We, in our ignorance, call them mosquitoes.
Well, this time of year, we like to tell a lot of different kinds of stories, but one kind that's always popular falls under that umbrella of tales of the devil and his tricks. Because the devil's been around a long, long time, and the tricks, well, like the devil, they may change their name or their shape every century or so, but when you get right down to it, there's only so many ways to get yourself a soul. But in the time and place of this story, the devil was feeling particularly lazy. He was tired of whittling away on one soul at a time. He wanted to speed up the process, optimize workflow, find modern solutions for the innovators, of the day sort of thing. So he went down to the deepest, darkest pits of hell, and he reached his clawed hands into the slimiest of the muck, and he made himself what he called an amazing imp. Now, it wasn't super hard to do once you got the handle on it, and truth be told, he could have made himself 1,000 amazing imps with a little wink of his eye, but as I mentioned, the devil was feeling lazy. So before he went to even a wink's worth of trouble, he decided he'd take that amazing imp up into the world of men and take it for a spin. So he went to a town where times were hard, where the wages were low and the rent's come due and the groceries starting to give you a little bit of side eye about that store credit. In other words, the kind of place you only find all the time and everywhere. And he walked up to the very first man he saw. He said, "John." Now here the devil is just playing the odds. There's a John in every town like that. And he said, "John, I heard you've had it hard these last few years." And John nodded despite himself. He knew just exactly who it was who was sympathizing with him on account of the devil was feeling lazy. So he didn't even bother hiding his horns or tail or little cloven hooves or anything. He just stood there, satanic as the day is long. But the thing of it is, come enough suffering, you'll take sympathy from anywhere you can get it, even the devil himself. And so John nodded, and the devil went on. "See, I have here," and the devil held out a little matchbox that was kind of rumbling and twitching like something in it really wanted to get out. "Something that will make your life so much easier." And he told John all about how the amazing imp could do all these things for him, make life so much easier, all for just a little percentage of his soul, just a fraction as determined by how much he called upon the amazing imp. Well, John sort of figured there were some parts of his soul that hadn't seen much use lately anyway, so he figured, well, why not? He accepted the devil's terms and conditions in his little matchbox full of imp and started walking home. Well, that imp was a chatty thing, just talked John's ear off the whole walk home. And while it didn't really have anything much substance to say, well, it was really intent on telling John how every word out of his mouth was pure gold. "That's very insightful, John," it said, when John remarked upon something, really deep, something like how hot the weather had been recently. And John couldn't remember the last time somebody called him insightful, though, and even coming from a little squeaky voice and a matchbox in his pocket felt kind of nice. So he kept on walking home, and when he got there, he asked the imp if it would help him go out and plow the field.
"Regretfully not my specialty."
Well, John asked if it was any specialty at, bringing in water or chopping wood.
"Regretfully no."
John said, "Well, truth be told, I'm not sure what I'm going to do with you then, because I was kind of hoping if you could help me get my work done. Well, I wanted to go write a letter to my mother, but..."
"Oh, well, that I could do in a flash."
And the imp snapped its fingers, and all of a sudden, there was a letter addressed to John's mother, saying almost exactly what he would have said, and, well, mostly the way he would have said it. And, well, he figured the devil was going to get a little for this anyway, and there was so much work to do, so he accepted that letter, put it in his pocket to mail to his mother for later. Realizing the imp was going to be no help in the field, he went and took it home to his missus and explained the nature of the thing and went out to work. And well, his wife had seen a lot in her hard life, so she took the news of the devil's spawn in stride, but she was pretty disappointed that it was no good at washing or wringing out laundry or anything that she wouldn't have mind selling a little bit of soul for. But while she was washing and wringing and cooking and shushing the children who kept asking her to tell a story, well, Imp piped and said, "I can do that for you." And the imp popped out of his little box and sat on a shelf and started telling her children a story. Now, wasn't as good as the stories that her mother had told her. And the children didn't laugh quite as much as they did when she did the funny voices, but, with so much other work to do, she figured it was good enough. And the children even started using that little imp too, because, parents figured their souls were so tiny anyway that the percentage the devil was going to take was hardly going to be noticeable by the time they were grown anyway. And children being so full of questions and that imp so full of answers. Some of them true, some of them not. Some of them a combination of truth and fiction heretofore unseen by mankind, but it was just all too pleased to talk to them any time, day or night. And well, the thing of it is, John and his wife, they weren't bad people. And unlike the devil, they weren't even lazy. The thing of it was, they were just tired. And you don't have to be all that clever to sell a tired man a rest. And, unlike the devil, John wasn't even proud. In the evenings when all the work was done, he'd like to sit down sometimes and do a little sketch, draw a picture of the wife and the kids. He'd been practicing at it, getting a little bit better every day. It wasn't anything like you put in a museum or anything like that, but it made him feel something, not just the pleasure of a job done, but feel something down in his soul, Well, one night the imp saw him doing that and said, oh, I can do that for you. It snapped its fingers, and there was a picture of his wife so accurate, it was like one of those photographs they'd never been able to afford to have taken. And he looked down at that and looked down at his little scratchings. Well, he just sort of set that pencil aside and never picked it up again. Well, time went on, and it wasn't just John and his family. That whole town was calling on that amazing imp for one thing or another. So when time finally came around and John passed away, the devil was just, so excited. He'd been keeping an eye on the situation. He didn't have it down to an exact number, but he knew he had a pretty good percentage of John's soul coming to him. And so it was with a greedy glint in his eye that he reached that clawed hand into John's heart to pull out what he was owed, and was dismayed to find that after all those years of help from the amazing imp, well, there wasn't any soul left in John at all.
My brother James and I have a little homestead far out in what used to be mining country. We had a habit of, at the end of the day, after a hard day's work, of going out on the front porch and sitting in our rocking chairs and smoking a wee bowl of tobacco and having just a wee tot of whiskey. And talking about how the town used to be so prosperous and the hills full of miners, and gold was coming out of there. Well, most of the gold's gone. Miners are mostly gone. Town's not so prosperous anymore. That's a story for another day.
I hope you appreciate the special effects.
Must have been an imp.
It probably was an imp, yes. So, anyway, we were sitting there drinking our whiskey and smoking our pipes, and we saw this fella come out of the trees up at the top of the hill. And he started to walk down the front of the hill. And we watched him, and we thought it was odd. The miners were all gone, so who was this guy? And he appeared to be glowing. But we figured it was just a trick of the afternoon sunlight shining off of his clothes. So we watched him, and he came all the way down to the bottom of the hill, and he stopped at the creek, knelt down, was there for a minute or so. Then he got up and started back up the hill. And we watched, and we thought, this is really quite odd, because he's still glowing, and the sun has dipped over the horizon. So it's not really a trick of the light, is it? Maybe it's a trick of the whiskey. But anyway, we watched, and he went up the hill, and he ended up disappearing into the woods. Well, the next day we went into town, and we ran into one of the old miners that's still there, and he's pulling a little gold out of his claim. And we told him what we'd seen. He said, oh, I know what that is. He says, back before you fellas came here, up on the top of that hill on the back side, there were these two brothers, Obadiah and Aloysius, and they had a pretty good little mine up there. And they had dug way, way into the side of that hill, following this little gold vein. And one day, there was a cave-in at the mine. Well, you could hear it all over the hillside. So we got a rescue party together, and we went up there, and we proceeded to start digging them out. When we got there, and the front of that mine was just piled full of big rocks. And we spent a whole week up there digging those fellas out. Well, when we finally broke through, we know that we were both going to be dead. We popped in there. Here's Aloysius. He's laying on the floor. He lifts his head up, and he says, boy, it sure took you guys a long time to get here. I'm really hungry. Well, we were really surprised. But we went over, and Obadiah's leg was trapped under the timber, so we got his leg loose, and it wasn't broke. So we got him up, walked him around, and got him some food. And then he told us this story. He says, when the mine caved in, I was walking around with my lantern looking for little flecks of gold in the sides of the tunnel here. And the mine collapsed, and I fell down. I got knocked out. Well, when I came to, I felt around, found my lantern, pulled a match out of my vest pocket and lit it. And I lit the lantern, and lo and behold, I have light. And sitting on that rock right over there was Aloysius. He walked over and handed me a canteen. He says, you need to drink this. It's going to take them fellas out there forever to get in here. You're going to need to stay wet. You need to drink lots of water. And then he went over and sat back on that rock. And we talked for a while. And then he said, just put the lantern out so you can get some sleep and save your oil. And I put the lantern out, and the next morning, I think it was morning anyway, I woke up and I lit the lantern, and there's Aloysius sitting there with the canteen again. He brings it over and gives it to me. Same thing. Drink lots of water. You're going to need it to stay alive until those rescuers get here. And it went on for 7 days. And here you are. So was Aloysius with you? Did you bring him with you? Is he okay? Well, they said that we haven't seen Aloysius. So they went into the mine looking around. Back in one of the tunnels off the side, they found Aloysius. Well, at least his feet sticking up underneath a big old pile of rocks. Figured that he probably died when the mine first collapsed. So that is the love that a man has for his baby brother, that he would come up from his grave, climb up through that little bitty hole in the top of the mine, and go down to the creek and bring him water every day to keep him alive. And that, gentlemen, is what you saw. Well, James and I don't really believe much in ghosts, so we went back to the farm, unloaded the wagon, and we decided we'd sit and smoke our pipes and have a little tot of whiskey. But today, we're doing it on the back porch, looking over the valley, because you just never know what you might see.
Melinda Alice was smart. Melinda Alice was pretty. But Melinda Alice wasn't nice. No, nice is not a word you would use for Melinda Alice. Case in point, when a new girl came to her class, oh, she was the sweetest gal, but she had freckles all over, and Melinda Alice made a show about saying, oh, the girl was contaminated, and she just made a show about having to wash her hands whenever she got near anything that this poor, sweet girl had gotten near. Now, the other girls in the class, they didn't like Melinda Alice. They would call her Melinda Malice, but only behind her back and never to her face. Oh, no. And they didn't shun her. They always seemed to stay with her. Maybe they knew the old Asian adage, keep your friends close and your enemies closer so you can keep an eye on them. Well, anyway, our story starts on the day of the big exam at school. Now, Melinda Alice always got really good grades, but she did work. She did study for it in order to get the grades she felt she deserved. And so she'd gotten up especially early this day. She'd done lots of studying leading up to the big examination, but she knew she had to get a little bit more studying before the big examination, and her favorite place to study was kind of a little glade there, just before you get to the school. And as she was walking along the path, she almost stepped on a little snail in the path. Now, it's one thing to accidentally step on a weak creature. It's another thing to look down and say, ew, what an ugly little snail. Let me squish it and put it out of its misery. And she lifted her boot and she was about ready to stomp down on it when she heard a little voice saying, don't squish me. And she said, why shouldn't I squish you? And the little snail said, because I can grant you 3 wishes. She said, oh, really? And it said, yes. And she said, oh, well, my first wish is that I could have 3,000 more wishes. And she walked on laughing. And she heard the little voice again, but did it say, like she thought, clever girl? Or was it more like, too clever, that girl? Well, as Melinda Alice walked along, she tried to figure out, well, what could she wish for? Let's start with something small, just to kind of test the waters. And she said out loud, I wish to be perfectly dressed. And she could feel some changes happening in her clothes. She looked down. Yeah, there were some tweaks, but not huge changes. But she thought that just proved she had perfect taste. Oh, she walked on a little bit further, and she thought of Jennifer, who always had those fabulous earrings on, pierced earrings, and her dad never let Melinda Alice get pierced ears. So she said, I wish I could have pierced ears, but the earrings have to be even better than Jennifer's earrings. All of a sudden, she felt her ears. There was something there. Oh, she didn't have to pull out a mirror to know that she looked fabulous. Well, she walked on and she thought, well, maybe she wasn't going to get those other 3,000 wishes, so maybe she better make sure that this third wish was something special. And she walked along and thought, oh, maybe she could wish for a horse. Dad always said they couldn't afford one. Just imagine the other girls if she came riding to school on a horse with, of course, a fabulous riding habit on, how those other girls would be just pea-green with envy as they were slogging through the mud. That was an idea. Maybe she could wish for clothing, for jewels, for enough money to have all the clothing and jewels. And she was thinking of stuff, and then she thought, well, some people might be saying that she should be wishing for something more altruistic. That was one of the words in the exam she had learned, altruistic. Maybe she should wish for something like, they would say, world peace. Well, yeah, if she wished for that, only if everyone would know that she was responsible for that world peace. And maybe she'd deserve a special award if she did that. Well, she was thinking of all kinds of different things she might do, and she realized she was coming up to the school, and one of her friends, her classmates, came running up and said, Melinda Alice, are you ready for the big exam? Oh, I've been studying so much. I scarcely slept at all last night, but I still don't know how I'm going to do. And Melinda Alice stopped in her tracks. That stupid snail, she thought. He made her forget all about the extra studying she had to do for the exam. Without that studying, she wasn't going to get the grade she deserved. Oh no, she said, I didn't study enough. I wish I were dead. Melinda Alice. Now we're going to take a brief break here, about 10 minutes. Those of you here at the Antique, I can still see there's some fabulous stuff along the counter and in the cooler. Tammy is known for her fabulous food. If you have a chance while you're grabbing something to eat, We do have the pumpkin that is accepting things. I promise I will take this to Nourish, put it in an envelope, and bring it over on Monday morning. And if you are one of these people who use, dare I say it, amazing imps, and you know things like QR codes, some of these are spread around, and we have some of these up here, and this will take you right to the Nourish site. Although, of course, you can also go to Nourish PC and make a donation there. Whatever you do, and you folks, whoever's there online, we will be back in about 10 minutes. You'll hear a ratchety sound. It looks like Jerry has a friend of our friend Slim here on the skeleton. Yes. So see you all in about 10 minutes. Enjoy your biological break. And I'll put the pumpkin, how about here?
Boy, you guys are determined. You just won't let this die.
Well, you know, we were going to let it.
No.
Yeah,
All I said was yes.
Yeah, we kept saying this would be the year we didn't need extra food. And we'll stop right there.
Okay.
I'll stop right there.
Everybody. Yes. Is that good? Oh, okay. Good. Okay, we got what a great idea. Let's have it here. Like this.
Oh, okay, somebody sang such an awesome idea. Maybe we can set one under the east side here. And
They should have a red ribbon for that.
You know, just like over. I mean, it was just. I could not get over it. But even at a grocery store, just people standing around and yelling at you, just like, it wasn't Wait, did I turn that? No, I didn't. Okay, go ahead.
Well, as Karen Chimbley warns us, sometimes the second half stories get a little scarier. But, it's all a matter of degree. And at the end, if there's any folks worried, she does have a surefire remedy that we can all take home and sleep soundly because of it. So, a lot of the stories that we tell, especially when we reach into that very deep bag of the traditional stories, tend to be cautionary tales. They carry a warning of one kind or another. As long as there are voices to warn and ears to heed or ignore, they'll be needed. So, little boys and bigger boys still sometimes cry wolf one too many times. And little girls and bigger girls still sometimes find very wrong company on the way to Grandma's house. Now, there's a story that's widely told across Mexico and the southwestern United States. A lot of Americans from back east seem to have first become acquainted with it around the time of the Mexican War in the 1840s. In the aftermath of the war, a large part of Mexico and what became, largely because of the war, the southwestern United States was occupied by American soldiers. And some of them noted that when mysterious scratches would appear on a door, when there were fingerprints on a window, when a fleeting figure would vanish in the night, the people would cross themselves and draw their children close and bar the doors and say, "It's like a Rona! It's the crying woman." Now, there are many stories of who she was or is, how she came to be. In the early part of the last century, an American historian and folklorist named J. Frank Dobie traveled widely across Mexico as a young man, living among the people, studying their customs, their beliefs, their stories. And he heard a Mexican mother tell the story of La Llorona to her daughters. And this, more or less, is the story he brought back to us. Long ago, centuries ago, when the Spaniards still ruled Mexico, there was a beautiful young woman who lived in a village in the Red Mountains. Thick red lips, rosy cheeks, golden hair. She was a wife and mother. And then she was a widow when her husband was killed in a duel. Now, her time as a grieving widow was quite short, for it was widely whispered throughout the village that the man who killed her husband in the duel was her lover. He was a hard, cruel man who did all things in his life as if he were leaping his horse across a wide chasm. And yet she loved him, this man who killed her husband, this man who made no secret of wanting nothing to do with a ready-made family, no secret of despising her young daughter. Would you love me and make me your wife if I had no daughter? She pleaded. Why ask such a question, he said dismissively. What difference would it make if I said yes or no? You have a daughter. She would always be there with those eyes and that chin that remind me of the man I killed, the man who tried to kill me. Already, the woman's charms had begun to wear thin for him. But for her, her love to this man only grew and engulfed her until it blotted out any thought or any feeling for anyone or anything else in this world. Now, if she had only thought past her twisted longing, If she had only sought the advice of a trusted friend, it might have all happened very differently. But instead, alone in her grief and her longing, she devised a desperate and a terrible plan. Taking her young daughter by the hand, she walked out from their home in the twilight, down the dusty streets, across a field of ripening peppers. Mi madre, ¿a dónde vamos? Mother, where are we going? Cried the child in confusion. She only tightened her grip on her daughter's hand. She walked faster, staring straight ahead to the banks of the canal. She steeled herself against the questions, against the frightened cries, against the gurgling and thrashing of a body held beneath the water. Oh, in her haste and her panic, she had not thought of clues or witnesses. She was seized by soldiers and brought before judges who sentenced her to be burned alive at the stake for the murder of her child. And all the village was there, looking on, all of them intoning, "The poor little child," as she was brought forth and bound to the stake with the great pile of dry wood. Among them was the man who had been her lover, looking on as coldly as the rest, for who could love a monster who would drown her own child? But there were delays, and it was twilight before the torches arrived to ignite the dry wood. And it was in a time of waiting that she came to see far, far too late that in the whole of her life, disinterested, abusive parents, a cold miser of a husband, a cruel, capricious lover. Only one set of eyes had ever looked upon her with unmixed love and adoration. "My poor little child," they heard her cry as the flames engulfed her. Then for a time, there was only flames and silence. And then they all saw a strange, white, glowing form rise up from the smoke and the smoldering flames. Fly upward, exactly in the form of the beautiful woman. And she drifted toward the canal, saying all the while, "My poor child, the pity, the horror, my poor child." But she found no child at the canal. And faster than any jaguar could run, faster than any bird could fly, she swept down the canal to the river, down the river to the sea. And soon all Mexico, all the Southwest knew the story of La Llorona, the crying woman. She might be seen in Mexico City one day, and far away in Durango or Saltillo or some other place the next. Wherever a child would cry, there she would come on the wings of the wind, and people would draw their children close, bring them indoors, and tell them not to go abroad, or La Llorona might have them. And where now could she take a child but to the land of the dead? And it was said that when men were hanged, there she would come. And in that awful dance of death at the end of the swaying rope, they would feel the coldness of her breath as she swept by. And sometimes she would walk rather than fly, and she wore a white rebozo that covered her face, and she carried her arms as if cradling a child, but they warned, "Do not approach her." Once a night watchman in a city, not knowing who she was, called out to her, "Pull aside your rebozo that I might gaze upon your lovely features." And they heard him scream, and they found him crawling like a drunkard on the ground. "Her face was a skull," he cried. "Her eyes were glowing coals, and her breath would chill the soul." Before morning, he was dead. And so she wonders, and so she searches, And so she haunts across the years, and so the people mourn. And the question arises, is there but one La Llorona, seen here, seen there, across 1,000 miles? Or there are a legion of crying women, each with their own slightly different tale of love betrayed, innocence sacrificed? And maybe the most chilling question of all, are the warnings enough? Or will there always be one more crying
Long ago and far away, Ambrose Beaton lived a story that, well, might not feel so far away after all. See, there was one thing that Ambrose felt absolutely dead certain about, and that was that what he had, he deserved, and what everyone else had, good or ill, well, they must deserve it too. For it was all about choices, he was fond of saying. He must have made good choices. He decided to invest in properties for rent, and he'd done very well. By that must have been a good decision on his part. And true, that led now and again to some hard decisions, like, well, when the recently widowed Mrs. Smith was not able to pay her rent. Well, it wasn't his fault that she had 2 little children to feed. It hadn't been his choice for her to marry a man who couldn't leave them any money when he departed. It was a difficult decision, but in the end, it was all just business, was it not? And so when they could not pay when the rent was due, he looked after himself. He looked after his business, and they were evicted very quickly, very efficiently, and in a very business-like manner, out into the winter cold. Now that night, the town saw a snowstorm, the likes of which they had not seen in an age, covering everything in a shroud of white, a shroud more literal for some than others. They found the bodies in a snowdrift, the mother clutching tight to her 2 children. They'd been trying to reach her sister in the next town over, but hadn't quite made it before they succumbed to the elements. Now, Ambrose was not made of stone. When he heard, it did give him a moment's pause. But again, it was not his responsibility, not his business, so he shook it off and went through his day. But that night, he found he could not rest. He twitched and flipped like bacon in a fry pan. He began to pace, and around about midnight, he got up and started walking. Like a man possessed, he found he couldn't stop walking. He left the house, left the town. He walked first 1 mile and then another, his feet carrying him onward as if he had no choice in the matter. And he eventually found himself standing outside a house where people were singing. Now, these were Yorkshire folk with their own little turn on the English language, and so they sang, "This ain't need, this ain't need, every need I know," meaning every night and all. Can you sing that line with me? Every need I know. Fire unsullied and candlelit, and cold shall be thy soul. Sing that with me too. And cold shall be thy soul. Once again, Amrose's feet carried him forward, carried him to the house, where he could now see that this was the wake for the mother and her 2 children laid out there on the table, surrounded by mourners singing. When all the days of life have passed, every need I know, to the bridge of dread thou comest Ambrose trembled, thinking of the bridge of dread, that soul's last travail between this world and the next. If clothing and shoes, then life you gave, every need and know, then sit ye down and put them on, and cold shall be thy soul. And Ambrose found himself looking at the feet of those children shod in tattered leather, their mother with no shoes at all. But of clothing and shoes you ne'er gave to none, every need and know, then the thorn shall prick thee to thy bare bone, and cold shall be thy soul. Well, Ambrose was beginning to sweat despite the winter chill as the wake song went relentlessly on. If food and drink in life he gave, every need and know, then the purgatory fire shan't make thee shrink, and cold shall be thy soul. Well, much like the treacherous feet that had pulled him inside, he found out his eyes would not let him look away from those gaunt, blue-lipped children looking so hungry. But if food and drink thou ne'er gave to none, every need and know, hunger grip thy stomach, thirst crack thy tongue, and cold shall be thy soul. The candles in the room seemed to flicker in time, and the smoke was twisting itself into shapes he dared not look at too very closely. Every word felt like a drumbeat, or was it the beating of his heart that seemed to rock and shake everything around him, while even the corpses there on the table seemed to rock back and forth in time with the song. This I need, every need and all. Oh, fire and fleet and candle light, and cold shall be thy soul. And with that last line, the body of the woman rolled, casting a cold and bloodless hand, pointing at him in wordless accusation. And at that, Ambrose ran. He ran though his feet, now shoeless, stung in the snow, ran though the branches clawed at his now bare back, ran like hell itself was after him, right across the room, tripping over his own slippers. He looked around. There was no mourners, no wake song haunting him. He was in his own bedroom. And he looked there on his bedside table. Why, there was the ledger showing it was the 31st. Rent was due tomorrow. Mrs. Smith and her children had yet to leave. And for the first time, Ambrose thought perhaps it was his business.
For a long time, Henry Bemis had an ambition. He wanted to read a book, not just the title, not just the preface, not a page somewhere in the middle, the whole book. For most people, this is a rather easy ambition to achieve, but for Henry Bemis, a person whose life was taken up by not enough time, it was an impossibility. Henry Bemis had no time of his own. His wife Agnes owned all of it, except for the part that his employer bought. And then there was the time it took to get back and forth to work, which Agnes begrudgingly gave up. Also, Henry had been tricked horribly by nature. He was given terribly myopic eyes. He couldn't see the hand in front of his face. His parents, when he was very young, thought him to be an idiot until they figured out that it was his eyes, actually, and then they got glasses for him. But Henry was never able to catch up. There just wasn't enough time. But all that was about to change. Henry had taken a small leave from his teller's booth at the Eastern Bank and Trust Company and gone down to the vault on a mission that he'd made up so that he could read a little bit of a magazine that he bought that morning. He opened the magazine up to a very cheerfully titled article, "The New Weapons of War and What They Can Do to You," when all of a sudden his ears were assailed by this horrible noise. It was so loud, so painful. The sound seemed to come from within him and from outside of him, and it was everywhere, and the floor tilted up and the ceiling tilted down. Henry was certain that he was going to die. And then all was silence and darkness and unconsciousness. When Henry came to, he looked over at the vault door and he realized that something quite horrible had happened, because the vault door, heavy steel, thick, bars and everything, was crushed up like an old thrown away tin can. Well, Henry pulled himself up off the floor and he tested his arms and his legs and figured that nothing was broken, so he reached up from his face and his glasses were still there. Well, thank God for that. If his glasses were gone, he'd never find his way out of this destroyed vault. And then he realized that something really bad must have happened, because it was so quiet. There was no sirens, there was no shouting, no running feet. I wasn't quite sure what this was, but he made his way over to the elevator. He needed to get out of the vault. And there was the elevator at the bottom of the shaft, the car looking like a crushed accordion. And at the bottom of the car was this blob of unpleasantness. Might have been a person, might have been several people. It's hard to tell. But Henry figured, well, I can't get out this way, so he makes his way to the stairs, climbing over the buckled floor and the turned over stairs. And he gets to the stairs, and they're just kind of buckled in and twisted around and everything. But he climbed up the stairs anyway and got up into the lobby, which was actually quite cheerful. There was a lot of destruction, but the bright sun was shining through the girders where the ceiling used to be. And he looked around, and there were little blobs of unpleasantness all over the place, kind of turned his stomach, so he tried not to look at them. And he called out to, because he knew something had to be done, he called out to his boss, "Mr. Carswell." Silence. So he looks around a little bit more and figures that, this is, something must be done. So he called out again, a little bit louder, "Mr. Carswell." Silence. And then he noticed that there was an arm sticking out from a large slab of granite, which used to be part of the ceiling. And on that arm, on the hand, on that finger, was the signet ring that Mr. Carswell wore. So Henry realized that the rest of Mr. Carswell must be under that big slab of granite. And he was saddened because Mr. Carswell was gone. The tellers were gone, the loan officers were gone, Willie the guard was gone, Sam the doorman was gone. What was going to be done about the bank? Well, Henry didn't really care. He had a plan. So he made his way to the door outside, and when he got outside, the bright sun was shining just like it was inside. And there was as much destruction, if not more, and many, many more blobs of unpleasantness, which he tried not to look at. So he started walking to where he wanted to go. And he thought, well, I should be trying to get to Agnes. And then he remembered a poster that he'd seen that said, in case of emergency, don't use the telephone. Your loved ones are as safe as you are. So if Agnes were safe, she were safe. If not, and he was fairly sure she wasn't safe, as nobody else in town, or maybe the whole state, maybe the whole country, maybe the whole world was safe. But he didn't want to think about that, so he pushed it out of his mind and continued on his way. And He started thinking, all in all, Agnes wasn't a bad wife. It wasn't her fault that he didn't have time to read. I mean, there's the house, the bank, the lawn, there's bridge on Tuesday, canasta on Thursday, there's charades on Fridays and Sundays. It's barely time to read a newspaper, which reminded him of the newspaper incident from last night. He had got home and settled into his chair quite easily because a squeaking spring would have called out to Agnes, letting her know that he wasn't doing anything. And he very carefully unfolded the newspaper because crinkling newsprint would have been a clarion call to Agnes. And the first thing he saw on the front page was peace talks break down, delegates rush off in anger. Okay, so he turned the page. Second page, president says war imminent. So thumbing through the paper, he found an article on the back about artifacts found on the Yucatan. And he thought, well, I'd like to read that later. So he's carefully folding the paper into fourths when he hears from the other room, Henry! Agnes had found him. And she was in the room on him in a flash, snapped the paper out of his hand, threw it in the fireplace. And she says, the Jones are coming over to play charades in a half an hour, and I'm not dressed. And you need to clean up this room and change it to something more appropriate for company. And here you are reading. She said that last part like it was an unclean act. Well, he saw the paper burn up and he knew that Agnes would be a little disappointed because the TV guide was gone too. But she said there's no time for TV tonight anyway. They'll be here at 10 o'clock at least. Well, Henry put that out of his mind because he thought, I can read all the newspapers I want now. But there won't be any more papers. No new newspapers. Agnes will be upset. No new TV guide. But then no TV, which almost made him laugh. But he thought that wasn't improper. So he trudged on. He looked across the street, saw the Gazette building over there had been destroyed, so he knew there weren't going to be any more newspapers. And then he saw his goal. Although the silhouette was changed a little bit. The round dome on the roof was just kind of a ragged half circle. It was half gone. And one whole wing of the building had been destroyed. It just fallen in on itself. And he thought, oh my, I hope they're not all destroyed, damaged beyond use. But he kept going, and finally he got there. He climbed up the steps, and he looked in the door, and he thought, you know, a public library is a wonderful place. Anybody, just anybody can come here and read a book. Now, he'd been here before, but he'd never gone in because he knew that if he was late getting home, Agnes would be really upset with him. But this day, he was going in. So he went in, and all the bookcases were tipped over, books were scattered everywhere. But to Henry's delight, many of them were just fine. So he started going through the books, kind of like a starving man at a delicatessen, just picking books everywhere and stacking them up all over the place. And then he found a title that he thought, oh, you know, I want to read this one now. So he sits down on the bookcase, opens the book up, and he looks down at it and smiles. And then there's a creaking noise of stone against stone, minor compared to the rumbling roar of a city being destroyed. Nevertheless, it was under the bookcase Henry was sitting on, and it shifted, tossing him off. And his glasses fell off his nose. Well, he searched around for the glasses all over the place, finally found them, and they were broken. So he looked down at the blurred page in front of him and cried.
Oh. This next story is from Orkney, a group of islands just north of Scotland. They're a fascinating place. I had the distinct pleasure of visiting there once. It was owned by Norway till the 1400s, and now it's Scotland, and it's this fabulous blend of Norse and Celtic. And today I'm going to talk about one town that's down on the south end of the main island, and that's Stromness, which is a seaport. And so in Stromness, it seemed as if the prodigal son had returned John Gow had been a reckless lad. He'd gone off to sea, but now he was sailing into Stromness Harbor, captain of his own ship, and a fine ship this was. It was named the Revenge. And oh, that very day, shopkeeper Mr. Gordon and his wife, they made such a social coup because they were the very first to invite this local son returned to their home for dinner. The very first night he was there. And while during dinner, he might have been a little bit vague about his ship's cargo or the ship's destination. Oh, there was nothing vague about the admiring glances that John Gow and the Gordons' one and only daughter, Thora, exchanged. And oh, the parents looked very happily on what a match this would be. But then there was a knock at the door, and the magistrate came in, warning Mr. Gordon that he needed to make sure that his shop was locked up sufficiently because a group of thieves had broken into the Beaton's mercantile, and they'd made off with rum, tobacco, and money. Unfortunately, the thieves had not been caught, he continued saying, but they had been seen. They saw them running down to the shore, getting into a small rowboat, and rowing out to the one and only ship that was in Stromness Harbor, which of course was the Revenge. Well, at this point, John Gow jumped to his feet and he strode out of the room muttering something about those fools that ruin it all. And the Gordons sat there looking in disbelief as their formerly affable visitor, well, he had suddenly left without any apology, without any thanks. And Thora Gordon, she stood there on the door watching as the tall figure dressed in a cloak strode on down to the docks. And this was the start of a month of lawlessness in the normally peaceful Orkneys. Now, all the Orkney folk, they had warmly welcomed this native son back into their midst, but they started wondering if, well, maybe they hadn't made a mistake. Because the second night they were there, John Gow and all of his crew, they went to the Straitsman Ale House. And they began bending their elbows, as it were. Now, they were used to people over drinking in the ale house. Why, every year when the whalers, they came back from being to sea for so long, oh, they certainly got drunk during their homecoming celebrations. But their celebrations, they were somehow wholesome. But for Gow and his men, there was almost something sinister, as if the knife and the snarl were just under the surface. Now, Gow did try to get his men under control, but as the obscenities and the fists flew faster and Gow made apologies to the landlord looked at him and said, "You are nae welcome here anymore. You or any of your scum. You need to leave now and never come back again." Gow and his sailors, they stumbled drunkenly out into the twisting streets of Stromness. And of course, this being a smallish town, you can imagine how from every window and door there are eyes and ears peering out, watching what was going on. They watched as the sailors made their way to the dock and got in a boat and headed on back. And they also watched very carefully how Thora Gordon seemed to be watching everything from her doorway. And so it was under these eyes and other such disapproving glances that the love story of John Gow and Thora Gordon, well, it was enacted. With such disapproval, they usually met after dark there down by the shore, maybe in the hill overlooking the town. Some even said amongst the tombstones there in the churchyard. And Mr. Gordon, he tried desperately to nip this in the bud. He reminded his daughter how some of these sailors, they were out committing crimes. She should not be doing this, but you know how it is. When a young heart believes itself to be in love, they will listen to no reason. Well, a month went by, and another ship came into harbor. This time it was the merchant, the Marguerite. And the captain immediately came to shore and he said he needed to speak with the magistrate, and what this captain shared, it horrified all in Stromness. It turned out the Revenge had originally been christened the Caroline. Its name was changed after a particularly violent mutiny during which the kind-hearted captain had been brutally killed, and the mutineers went off on a bloodthirsty piratical spree led by none other than John Gow. Well, that evening at supper, Mr. Gordon was all but beside himself. A pirate? A mutineer? A murderer? To think that such a man, he broke bread with us here at our table. Thora, you will not see this man ere again. Thora just rose. She looked her father in the eye and said, I'm going to see John now. And she walked out of the door before anyone could stop him. Now, Orkney is said to have been inhabited for millennia. And some of these earliest of the inhabitants, they left some very interesting artifacts, including large stone circles of giant stones. Now, Stonehenge is not the only one. There are a number of these in Orkney, and the standing stones of Stennis was just outside of Stromness, and for the longest time there was a stone off to the side, a giant stone with a hole bored through it, and they called this the Orkney stone. No, I'm sorry, the Odin stone. And it was said that if two people made a vow with their hands clasped through the Odin stone, their vow would be eternally binding. And so it was at the Orkney stone that Thora Gordon and John Gow, they pledged their love to each other. John went back to his ship. Thora went to her home to await word from her lover. But that word never came, for the next morning, the Revenge was gone from Stromness Harbor. Gow had heard of the threats against him, and he thought to flee. He escaped. He tried to sail away, but it seemed as if nature itself was against he and his crew escaping. There were freakish winds and tides, and the authorities managed to rather quickly capture and put in chains John Gow and his men and take them down to London for trial. Now, the trial of John Gow is a matter of historic public record. Honest, you can check this up. And he bravely refused to make a plea, even when faced with thumbscrews that shattered the fragile bones. And it wasn't until he was threatened with a delightful bit of justice called pressing, in which the prisoner would be stretched out on the ground and ever increasing amounts of stone and iron would be piled upon them until they died a lingering, agonizing death. And at this point, he finally agreed to plead not guilty. The trial went on, and he and all of his compatriots, they were found guilty and sentenced to be hanged until death. Now, his death was exceptionally cruel because the hangman's noose did not do its job quickly, and after Gow had hung there choking and writhing for some 4 minutes, the executioners sought to speed things along and tug at Gow's feet, thinking to break his neck, but unfortunately he only broke the rope. Gow fell to the ground, still alive, and he was obliged to climb back up the steps. All eyewitnesses say that he did this very bravely, but this time the hangman's noose did its duty instantaneously. Gow and all of his men were kept hanging. They were coated with tar and wrapped with chains and kept hanging there on the execution docks in London as a warning to all other would-be pirates. Now, meanwhile, back in Stromness, Thora Gordon began to start having visions that no one else saw. The first one came the same night that Gow was executed, although she was unaware of it at the time. She was seated at dinner, and she looked up, and there across the table from her sat her lover. Oh, he was resplendently dressed. There was lace. There were shining silver buttons, and he smiled at her and made as if to speak, and she said, "John!" But he disappeared, and she was faced with glares from her parents. From this time, anytime she walked those twisting streets of Stromness, she always saw John Gow, but anytime she tried to get near him, he would vanish. He started haunting her dreams. The first time he appeared to her, he was carrying a smoking pistol. There was a splash of blood on his cuffs, and he smiled, a smile that was simultaneously handsome and also cruel. She awoke with a start and looked up, and the face was looking down at her. She reached towards it, and it vanished. It got to the point that wherever she went, inside or out, she was haunted by the figure of John Gow. One evening, she was on an errand for her mother. She was in the Beatons mercantile there and waiting at the counter, and all of a sudden to Thora it seems as if the walls themselves started to creak and the room it started to pitch and move as if she was on board a ship with a terrible storm with high seas. And she looked before her, and there lay her lover, but his clothing wasn't fine, now it was stained. He reeked with his own foulings. His hands and his feet, they were manacled, and he was tossed from side to side as if from the motion of the wave as he lay there in the ship. And she knelt down to reach to him with pity, but she felt as if a wave of cold, freezing water slammed her down to the ground where she lay senseless. And from a distance, she heard Mrs. Beaton's voice saying, "Oh, you poor lass, what was your mum thinking of sending you out on such a foul night?" And it was indeed a foul night. And with Orkney, trust me, they are used to winds. And even they said the gales were incredibly strong, and they howled around the stone homes and buildings there in Strongness and down the streets. But for Thora, it was even worse, because mixed with the shrieking of the wind were the cries and yells of her lover, saying over and over again, "Release me! Let me go into the healing torment! Let me go!" Hours it seemed to go on until just before dawn, the wind died down, and she heard one last, "Release me." She was finally able to fall asleep with the quiet, and she started dreaming. In her sleep, she found herself walking along a beach, and there ahead of her she saw a tall pole with something large and stiff hanging from it, and she thought maybe this was a fish one of the fishermen had caught, maybe a giant fish, maybe even a shark that they had hung there and left to dry and get preserved in the wind. But as she got closer, she realized this stiff figure was covered with clots of tar, and there were chains dangling from it, and from the opening that had used to have been a mouth came the words, "Let me go." And Flora's eyes flew open, and she knew that John Gow had been executed, and she knew that there was something she had to do. She convinced one of the local fishermen to give her a ride on his boat down to London, and there she got a ride from one of the ferrymen out to the execution docks, and the ferryman looked at her and said,
Oh, sweethearts don't usually come here after their lovers have been hanging for so long and gotten so rotten. Are you sure you're up for it, my dear? Will you recognize him?
well, she did recognize him, both from the shattered thumbs and also the high cheekbones and the flash of white teeth that could be seen beneath the flap of skin. And she reached up and she took the hand that had felt so warm last time she held it, and she said, "John, I release you from your vows. I release you from the vows we made together. And now I pray you do find peace." And though there was not the smallest bit of breeze that day, the body of Gow and all of his fellow pirates began to sway as if in a heavy wind, and the clanking of the chains around them rang out a macabre parody of church bells. And Thora Gordon turned her face towards the north, towards Strongness, where she too hoped to finally find peace. Now, those of you who used to come to the bonfire, you might know that at this point, I'm obliged to say, I sense some unbelievers. The old French Canadians used to tell tales of such disbeliefs. In these old tales, the disbeliever would always be called the young man who had been to the United States. It was a cold, moonless night, and all the men were gathered around in a cabin, seeking warmth around the fire, and they were sharing stories of the devil and his tricks. And one told how he had seen the devil on a deserted island. The trees were taller than the devil himself was taller than the tallest trees. His eyes were blazing like coals, and he was crying out against the ringing of church bells. Another shared how he had seen the devil seated on a miser's doorstep, appearing one moment as a toad, the next as a stone, the next as something quite different. All had a story to share, all believed the tales, all save the young man who had been to the United States. He stood cowering and cringing in fear in the corner. It is the devil's dog. Oh, wait, no, I didn't start. Yes. No, I'm sorry. Jumping ahead. Forgive me. I usually do so much better on this. All right. The young man was scorning and scoffing at this belief, and an uneasy silence filled the room. Now, the door flew itself open, and in walked a huge black dog who had a black coffin strapped to its back. And it walked slowly into the room, and one by one met the eyes of all of the men. And then it slowly laid itself down before the fire. "It is the devil's dog," said the eldest. "It has come for one of us." The other men were confused. "But how do we know? What should we do? What?" The eldest silenced them all. "We must each of us in turn lie in the devil's coffin." And so the men lined themselves up in order of seniority, and each of them stepped into and laid out flat in that coffin. Now, when the one whose heart was pure laid down, the dog moved no more, as if it had been carved out of stone. But when the one whose heart was black with sin laid out in that coffin, the dog struggled to rise to its feet. Oh, it was as if he was in pain. There was a terrible grinding and gnashing of teeth, but the dog never completely rose. Finally, all of the men had taken their turn, all save the young man who had been to the United States. Now he stood in the corner, cringing in fear. "The devil must not be denied," the eldest said. "All must take its turn." And so the men fell upon that young man and they dragged him as he struggled and screamed. They brought him across the floor. They lifted him up, put him in that coffin, and pressed him flat. And immediately the dog leapt to its feet, raised its head, gave an unearthly howl with eyes blazing like the fire behind it. It ran out of that cabin, leapt over the threshold, and out into the darkness. And the men all stood together there at the doorway and listened as from further and further away, more and more distant, came the diminishing yells of the young man who had been to the United States. And he was never seen or heard from again. No, not ever. Now, as those of you here head home, do be careful and watch out for large black dogs. Those of you at home, well, watch out with your travels. But worse than anything frightening we've told today, and that's the fear of hunger. That's why I'm so honored to be here on the stage with four of the best storytellers I know who are also dear friends. Come on up here. And this is Jerry Eckram, who first had the idea for the bonfire back in '95. Can you believe that? We were kids back then, right? Yes. Sarah Comer was the next one to join us, and Mike Preston. Thank you all four of us, for being here. More thanks. Thanks to Tammy and her crew and the awesome food we're enjoying here. Those of you at home, if you live in Tacoma, wander up to the Antique Sandwich for some of the best food in town. Those of you watching online, please, a huge thanks to Mr. Chris Staudinger. He and his Pretty Gritty Tours have graciously agreed to share, free of all costs, this particular evening's program. So those of you online, I bet you can find someplace on the website where you can tip the tour guide to make sure, give your appreciation to Chris. And to all of you, we know that there's something far more frightening than anything we have told tonight, whether it's devils, whether it's even AI, and that's the hunger that's going around and is so rampant all across our country right now. And that's why I'm honored to stand here and say that everything that we're earning tonight will go to Nourish Pierce County. Those of you here in the Antique, there's a pumpkin there. I will take everything from that pumpkin on Monday, take it over to Nourish. There are a number of sheets here with a QR code. Those of you at home, I believe Chris, thank you, Chris, has put a QR code up there. If you're watching this after the program, I believe you should then go to nourishpc.org and click donate. Thank you everyone for helping stamp out the fear of hunger in our time. Pleasant dreams all. Thank you.